Before we get started, I wanted to introduce our other two panelists, and then I'll go ahead with some remarks. On the right in the tan suit is Ken Naquin, who is the CEO of the Louisiana AGC. Did I get your title right?
That is correct.
Okay, and then on the left is Jonathan Kernion, who is the president and CEO of Cycle Construction. Are you in Metairie?
Yes, Kenner, Louisiana.
Kenner, Louisiana. And they're joining us today from the Louisiana AGC offices in Baton Rouge. I'm joining you from my house in Washington, D.C. I'm the vice president for the national spokesman for the Associated General Contractors of America. And apologies again, I'm going to be delivering the remarks that Ken Simonson prepared for the media event, and then we'll hope to get him looped in on the Q&A. All right, I'm going to go ahead and deliver his remarks then, and I'll do my best Ken Simonson impersonation. And so I'll start off by saying good morning, and thank you, by the way, to Ken and Jonathan for joining us virtually for this media event. Again, I'm Brian Tremail speaking on behalf of Ken Simonson. Ken is the chief economist for the Associated General Contractors of America. And the coronavirus has made it impossible for Ken or for me to travel down to Louisiana and to participate in an actual news conference. But more significant, the pandemic has had a sudden and severe impact on the construction community in Louisiana and across the country. Nationwide, half of construction firms report having at least one project. Actually, it's 68% of construction firms report having one project that was underway, canceled since the start of the pandemic, or delayed since the start of the pandemic. And the sudden decline in demand has had a dramatic impact on construction employment in New Orleans, in Lake Charles, in Baton Rouge, and in Shreveport. Indeed, according to new figures the Associated General Contractors of America is releasing today, construction employment in New Orleans declined by 2,800 between March 2019 and March 2020, which is a 10% drop. Indeed, construction employment in the Crescent City is now at 26,500, the lowest figure since data first became available in 2005. New Orleans had the 5th largest total loss in construction jobs and the 7th highest rate of construction job losses out of the 358 metro areas the association tracks. Construction employment also declined by 4,600 jobs and 18% in Lake Charles, by 2,000 jobs and 4% in Baton Rouge, 100 jobs and 1% in Shreveport. Sadly, Louisiana's metro areas were not alone. Nationwide, 99 out of the 358 metro areas we track lost construction jobs for the year, while construction employment was stagnant in another 54 areas. Worse, we expect the industry will shed even more jobs over the coming months as the benefits of the Paycheck Protection Program run out and full economic impacts of nationwide lockdowns weigh on private and public sector demand. But a prolonged slump in construction employment is not a foregone conclusion. The president and congressional leaders have made it clear they believe the best way to revive our economy is through rebuilding aging infrastructure. New infrastructure funding will put more people back to work in high-paying construction careers in communities like New Orleans and other metro areas. It will create tens of thousands of manufacturing, mining, and service sector jobs as equipment makers, aggregate firms, and other construction suppliers see in new orders. And new infrastructure investments will drive demand for new buildings and other developments in places like New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Lake Charles, and Shreveport. So that is why the construction employers and workers the Associated General Contractors of America represents are calling on Congress and the President to work together to enact new infrastructure funding as quickly as possible as part of the next recovery measure for the coronavirus. Without increased funding, more Americans will lose their jobs while our highways, our waterways, our water systems, our other infrastructure continue to crumble and deteriorate. Now I'd like to turn things over to Ken Naquin, the Chief Executive Officer of the Louisiana AGC, and he's going to talk a little bit more about what they're seeing in the state and how infrastructure investments would help you guys. So Ken, I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll have it go to Jonathan.
Thank you, Brian. Ken Naquin, CEO of Louisiana AGC. We're the only statewide and largest construction association in the state. We represent some 750 plus construction-related firms. The figures that the U.S. Department of Labor has come out with for March 2020 as compared to March 2019 for the state of Louisiana is not surprising to us. We have been saying now for probably 10 years that an investment in infrastructure, an increased investment in infrastructure puts people back to work. You know, Franklin Delano Roosevelt brought the country out of the Great Depression by building public works projects. There's no better way to restart, to re-kick the economy than to spend it on infrastructure. And it doesn't really create debt at the national level. Dollar for dollar, what is spent on increasing infrastructure is paid back in taxes and further investment in the economy. So it's really a debt-free investment by the country. I'm a little discerned right now that I hear Congress saying the next stimulus bill, which will be stimulus 4, will not contain any infrastructure. That will be pushed back to stimulus 5. And it's typical for the last 10, 12 years at the federal, at the state, and at the local levels, everyone has said, our elected officials have said, we need to increase infrastructure spending. But at the end of the day, nothing happens. So I'm a little discouraged right now from what I'm hearing from Washington. But we're not surprised by the figures. Louisiana, following the 12 southern states, does the lowest investment on an annual basis in infrastructure. Texas, our neighbors to the west, their highway construction program is $1 billion a month. That's $12 billion a year. Louisiana's base highway program for the year is about $600 to $650 million a year. We're the lowest of the 12 southern states. We're also the only southern state, not in the last 5 years, not to have addressed our long-term infrastructure spending. We're the only state not to have done that. So when you look at states like Florida, when you look at states like Tennessee, the Carolinas, Virginia, Texas, that have made significant investments in their future infrastructure spending, and you see their economies booming, there's no reason to wonder why. We have probably lost billions, tens of billions of dollars of industrial investment that was to come to Louisiana in the last year to the state of Texas because of our lack of infrastructure to address those projects. So the figures of the lost construction jobs, doesn't matter what the coronavirus says, is not surprising to us because we continue as a state not to address our long-term infrastructure spending. Jonathan, can you give us a New Orleans perspective per se?
Positively, thank you. So looking at the thing as a virus itself, going into the virus, it seemed like we were in more of a suppressed market. As Ken said, Texas was building roads, we weren't building nearly as much. Highway budgets were suppressed over here. Going into the virus, we started off in a suppressed market, and then now I'm noticing backlogs are drying up more. We're not seeing the plans getting advertised, plans being designed, projects being advertised, let on the market. We also see sometimes 20 bidders on a project. Nobody wants to be the low bidder out of 20 people for sure. And people are fighting for work, trying to get the work. And that's one of the biggest issues that we notice locally. To me, this thing hit us in a way like Katrina did in a lot of different ways didn't have the flood waters, but definitely don't have the restaurants open, have the lack of traffic and those type of things. As well as after Katrina hit, when you make your phone calls, nobody's there, nobody at the public agencies, you just can't get people to really respond as well, those sort of issues. And I see this pretty commonplace now. And we're still working. We've had a couple of our projects got shut down. One of them got restarted again after being shut down for a month. One of them still shut down. Other projects are still working. But the biggest concern that I have is getting the work, one, advertised, one, having the work to advertise and design, and that's what Ken's talking about, they have an infrastructure package, and then after that, getting it out. And I think if they do come up with an infrastructure package, I think it would help quite a bit. And part of my reason for saying this, having done a lot of storm cleanup work over the years, anytime I go into a place where a storm hit, even New Orleans with Katrina, it was a suppressed market going into the storm. But the whole cities and all would flourish after that, investment of federal money to go ahead and rebuild the areas to come back. And it always flourished and everybody went back to work. Mobile 1979, I noticed that specifically. It was the city was suffering, people weren't working, storm hit, federal money came in, everybody went to work, you had roofers working, all kinds of people, insurance money, and then next thing you know, Mobile flourished for several years after that. And I think the infrastructure package would have a similar type effect on this. And as Ken said, it's kind of frustrating to hear that they're kind of backing up on it, because both sides of the aisle agreed they want to have an infrastructure package. That's been, ever since Trump mentioned it early on, that was one thing that they agreed on. They didn't agree on anything else, but they agreed on infrastructure. So why they're holding it back, I don't know, but I definitely think it'll help us in a lot of ways, as it did post-Katrina, when we saw infrastructure coming out from Corps of Engineers with federal funding. Once contractors get back to work, you have a massive ripple effect of that money going out into the community and everything else. So that's my view on it, and that's how I'm seeing it right now.
Let me add also that we are very appreciative of the governor and the mayors of the cities, particularly New Orleans and Baton Rouge, Mayor Cantrell and Mayor Broome, for declaring construction industry, both public and private, as an essential service. For the most part, all our contractors are working. I don't want to say construction has stopped. I want to say construction is working. We have safety measures in place on every job. There are to protect the workers from this virus, but it has affected productivity. Our last poll of our members, they're probably operating at about 40% capacity right now. They're all working, but they're operating at about 40% capacity. So one is they could do more, and two, they want to do more. It's an industry that people have not walked away from. You know, when the federal government allowed an extra $600 of unemployment comp if you walked away because of the virus. For the most part, our workers have not done that. Our workers have stayed on the job, and they continue working. So, Brian, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. So for those of you who may be new to, including me, new to a Zoom news conference, as we're learning new things, there should be a Q&A option on the bottom of your control bar or in the middle of your control bar. If anyone wants to type questions in there, we'll try and get those answered. And while folks have an opportunity to type those questions, and I'm hoping that works. If not, there's also a chat function on the bottom right, especially if you click the participant list, that you can use to type in questions. But I'll start with a question I got from a call prior to this, which was a reporter from Lake Charles wanted to know if and I'm gonna, by the way, I've got Ken Simonson looped in on the audio, but I'm gonna start with Ken Naquin and Jonathan. If you have any observations about the current status of the market in Southwest Louisiana, especially Lake Charles, and some of the sort of the bigger industrial projects that were going on there that you might want to comment on.
Well, I think in Southwest Louisiana, I think part of the job loss there in Lake Charles is the fact that they have completed a couple of the major industrial projects. That being, one was the natural gas plant down in Cameron Parish, and two, the Sasol project there in Lake Charles. They're winding down, and I don't see a rush by the industrial sector to replace those projects. Again, our neighbors to the west, Lake Charles is as close to Texas as anybody. And I think some of the projects are going to Texas that the plants were thinking about doing in Lake Charles. We do hear that the Port of Lake Charles and the City of Lake Charles is letting a few projects. But, you know, we track projects that are going to be let in the next 6 months statewide. And the projects that are going to be let to the construction industry, both public and private, have literally fallen off the table as far as people pulling the projects, owners pulling the projects to be let in the next 6 months.
Thank you, Ken. And by the way, we have Ken Simonson on the line, and maybe if not that specific question, I didn't know if there were any comments that you wanted to add. We've got him patching by audio, so I'm hoping this is going to work. Ken, was there something that you wanted to add before we went to the next question from Timothy Boone?
Let's see if this audio is working okay. Are you able to hear me?
Can everyone hear him?
Yes.
Go ahead, Ken.
Good, okay. I think Ken's exactly right. Of course, it's extremely dependent on what's happening with oil and gas exploration, particularly offshore, but also with the processing plants. And at the moment, with oil at decade-long lows and maybe going to set all-time lows, I think the prospects for new investment in that area are very weak, and that's going to be a negative for other parts of Louisiana also. But you do have some strengths, but I think it also underscores the reason that it's really important to get the federal government coming in. This is not something that you can leave state by state. You have to have federal investment at a time when the states are being strained by extra expenses and a big drop in revenues.
Thanks. We'll go to the first sort of typed question, and this comes from Timothy Boone. And nice to see you're asking questions. He asked, is there anything specific that made the Louisiana numbers so bad? And when were the numbers taken? Was it before the widespread stay-at-home measures? I'm going to start with the second half of the question and let Ken Simonson talk about the timing of when the federal folks collect the numbers so that we can get a sense of why this is more foreshadowing than a real measure, and then we can kind of tackle what we think made Louisiana's numbers so bad. So Ken Simonson, did you hear that question? You know, when were the numbers collected?
The federal government collects a snapshot of employment on the payroll period, includes the 12th of each month. And so for firms that have a payroll day that ends on Saturday, that would have been March 13th in many cases. For some, maybe if they were on a bi-weekly, it was March 20th. It was not a single day, but in general, the payroll period that was covered ended a good deal sooner than most of the impacts of the corona showed up. Particularly, I think Louisiana, things were still going full blast during the week that ended on the 13th, and so you may really have had very little of the impact in these figures, which is ominous, obviously. If you're already scraping the bottom here and the worst impacts of the coronavirus are only going to show up in the April data, we have to assume things are going to get still worse.
Okay. And then the first half of the question is there anything specific that made the Louisiana numbers so bad? And I'm going to infer that means, you know, beyond the coronavirus, is there something unique about what was going on in Louisiana? I don't know which Ken or Jonathan wants to tackle that.
I'll take care of it, Brian. I think it's a combination of things that I mentioned earlier, that Louisiana is the only state in the last 5 years not to address its long-term investment in infrastructure. And if you look at North Louisiana, we have many contractors, highway contractors, that have had to go to Arkansas and Northeast Texas to work because there's just no infrastructure work in North Louisiana. And again, we're the last state of our 12 southern states, and what we do annually on infrastructure. And I just think that combination of that, and when you don't address infrastructure, you don't, it mushrooms because private investment in the economy dries up. No one's going to invest in strip shopping malls. No one's going to invest in theaters. No one's going to invest in the things that private investors invest in if you can't get to the facilities that they build. So I think it's a combination of that. And I think it's also a combination of some of the major industrial projects have wound down in the last year. And because of our lack of infrastructure, and amongst other things, I think because of our lack of infrastructure is one thing. There's other things that the industrial sector has moved some of their projects to the state of Texas.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please.
Another issue, and once we had the BP deal, the Gulf of Mexico got shut down for a solid year. And my whole life, I've always noticed that Louisiana, and it's always been said that Louisiana's definitely tied, our economy's tied to the oil production in the Gulf of Mexico. Oil production in the Gulf of Mexico's down, that massive ripple effect goes away. Same way with this coronavirus. Right now, they have all oil tankers are parked offshore and they can't unload the oil tankers because the demand's gone. Well, if the demand's down, well, that also, the gas tax. There's a gas tax on every gallon that's pumped. And if people aren't burning that fuel, there's no more gas tax going into the Department of Transportation to fund any of these projects. So it's kind of a massive perfect storm where everything's coming together and hitting at one time.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, let's go to the next question from Katie, who wants to know what are some specific infrastructure projects you'd like to get off the ground in the Baton Rouge area? And I'm assuming, Ken, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I think, and it's been funded, and it will happen. But I think the widening of I-10, of course, a bridge in the greater Baton Rouge area is a necessity, and I'm hoping it's built in my lifetime. We've been talking about it seems like my whole life in AGC, and that's been 40 years. But I think a bridge, I think the widening of I-10, I think something's got to be done with Airline Highway to make it more of a corridor and get people off of the interstate. So those are just a few projects, I think, Baton Rouge. And I think the drainage in Baton Rouge, I mean, the flood from 16 we're still remembering that. We're still rebuilding from that. And I think the drainage issues are big in Baton Rouge. We have to do something with drainage. When we can't take care, and New Orleans likewise, when we can't take care of our rainwater on a typical afternoon rain, that's disconcerting.
Gotcha. Thanks, Ken. I'm going to go on to the next question, if that's all right. And that's any indications on what the oil prices are doing to our state funding in this year's budget? I know it's early, but curious when so much of our state relies on oil. And that question comes from Keith Keller.
Keith, I have no idea. And I don't think anybody up at the big building right over here has any idea. So I really can't answer that. And when the legislature goes back in session, I'm sure there will be some more clarity to that. But I really don't know what's going to happen to the state budgets.
And Ken Simonson, I don't know if you have any observations or thoughts on sort of oil price trends and its impacts on sort of a macro level state budgets around the country.
No, I agree with Ken. It's too early to tell.
Gotcha. All right. All right, we're going to take that one as done. All right, I'm working through the list here. Next question is there any specific planned grassroots efforts to push Congress to act sooner rather than later on long-term infrastructure programs? And thoughts on U.S. Department of Transportation and AASHTO. AASHTO is the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, which is essentially the group in Washington that represents state DOTs, asking Congress to backstop state Department of Transportation in the next stimulus plan. I'll start with that one, actually, and then anyone else wants to file in. AGC of America is, in fact, engaged in a nationwide effort to educate Congress on the value of investing in infrastructure and the need to really include infrastructure in what in Washington they're going to call the coronavirus 4.0, the sort of the next recovery measure. And one of the points we've been making is we've passed a lot of measures to give contractors a lifeline, to give businesses a lifeline, to keep them afloat, keep payrolls intact. We've got to start thinking about the recovery. Where are we going to go? How are we going to rebuild our economies? And our national association has been doing everything from social media and targeted advertising in key congressional districts to educate folks on the benefits of investing in infrastructure. We've got 26 million people on the unemployment rolls, and if we can pass infrastructure, we can get a lot of those folks to work in high-paying construction careers. And on the short term, we've also been engaged aggressively in helping encourage Congress to provide an estimated $50 billion to help backfill those state DOT budgets. Most state DOTs collect their highway funding revenue, in part at least, from sale of gas tax. Like many people, I haven't filled up my tank of gas since early March because I'm not driving to and from work. And so the fewer people on the roads, the less revenue coming in for state DOTs. So we're engaged in working with our member firms and the people they work with to educate their members of Congress about the need to include this. We're doing advertising, we're doing traditional lobbying, we're looking at virtual fly-ins as well. So yes, we're aggressively involved, and I don't know if the Kens or Jonathan wanted to add anything to that point.
Well, let me say one thing. I think these help packages were great that they put out there, but, the government puts out $1, they actually don't get anything in return for it. In the infrastructure, they put out $1, they get something built for it. Put out $1 million, they might get a road, puts people to work, but they actually benefit from having a road in the future. So they, it's something, they get something in return for it. And I think that's, to me, where the infrastructure package makes more sense than anything than just giving money to help people bridge their gap or help them get past the next thing, the next moment in their life, And I think that's more common sense than anything. The government, look, they put out the PPP thing that helped, it kept paying people's salaries and all, but what did the government get in return for it? I would have rather than give me a couple large projects, put everybody to work, guarantee we don't need to lay them off, and then the government gets actual work done in place and everybody sells products and the ball gets rolling like that again. So.
Yeah, here in Louisiana with our congressional delegation, we're doing the same. We're following the AGC of America's lead. We're contacting them, pushing them hard. I got to tell y'all that all of our congressional delegation is probably on board for doing an infrastructure package sooner than later, which would be stimulus 4, not 5. So our legislative delegation in Washington is pretty much on board for doing something.
Great, thank you. Brad, and apologies if I get your last name wrong, Sesak, wanted to know if we had any comments specific to what we're seeing in the Shreveport area. And I think we alluded to this earlier, but do we expect the April 2020 numbers to be even worse than the March one? So I don't know if you guys down in Baton Rouge want to take the first stab at what you're seeing up in Shreveport, and then Ken, maybe you can sort of give your prognosis for Ken Simonson, the prognosis for the April 2020 numbers.
Well, I'll speak to Shreveport specifically. It was on the downslide before the virus, and I think everybody up there knows that. I think everybody in North Louisiana knows that the economy's been tough north of Alexandria. It really has been. If you look at what's going on up there was not a whole lot of investment in economic development. So I think we're hoping that an infrastructure package, not only a highway infrastructure package, but a vertical infrastructure package too. There is some state funded buildings in Shreveport. Southern University in Shreveport is up there. We have literally abandoned our university structures for the last 10, 12 years. They're falling down around us. So, there's a vertical infrastructure package that needs to be addressed as well. Schools, universities, courthouses, etc. But particularly up in Shreveport, it was on a downslide before the virus. I can only imagine how bad it is now with the virus. But our contractors in Shreveport are working. I got to tell you, they're working. A lot of them are not in Shreveport, working in Shreveport, but the ones housed in Shreveport are all working. It's just there wasn't a whole lot going on before the virus, and I'm hoping that any kind of infrastructure package would jumpstart all of North Louisiana. I got to throw out all of North Louisiana because I think they need help economically.
And Ken Simonson, did you want to tackle the prognosis for the April 20 unemployment figures?
Sure. Unfortunately, I think it's clear that things are going to get worse for quite some time. AGC of America has been surveying our members frequently, and the latest survey that came back on last Thursday, the 23rd, showed that about a third of firms have had to terminate or furlough employees. Now, there is a ray of hope in this that we also had very high uptake of the PPP loans. Those are the Paycheck Protection Program loans that are intended specifically to enable companies to keep workers on payroll or bring them back. And we did see a jump in the percentage of respondents who said that they had added workers, specifically in April. And this coincided with the 44% of the firms saying that they had already received funding for the PPP loans, 15% that they'd been approved and were expecting to get funding shortly, and another 15% who had applied and were awaiting an answer or had been been too late to get it into the first program, but now that it's been extended, we're optimistic they'll get funding. And so I do think that that may provide a temporary lift to construction employment. Numbers will still go down, but maybe not as drastically in April as expected. However, this is only meant to cover 8 weeks of payroll. So it's putting off the problem where you still need to get money specifically for infrastructure and for other things that will put people back to work on a long-term basis.
Thank you, Ken. One question from Charles is, what are the major newsworthy projects on your radar in the New Orleans area that have been canceled because of the pandemic? And I would add, Charles didn't write this canceled or maybe even delayed. I don't know.
Well, I know that the two, if you go downriver from New Orleans, where CPRA, Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, has awarded the projects on the Barataria and the Mid-Brenton diversion canal structures, in excess almost $2 billion worth of work, has been somewhat delayed because of trying to get some of the permits and the go-aheads through the bureaucracy that is kind of also, I mean, it's just not working like it did before the virus. But there has been no highway projects that have been delayed in the New Orleans area. I think there has been some delays on some sewage and water boards, some city of New Orleans jobs, only because they just, from a city standpoint, they don't have the people. They've got people at home too with the virus. And you can't make people work in this environment, guys. You got to understand that a permit section for a municipality, if those people are concerned about their health, you can't make them work. So I think all of government has been affected by the virus, and we see some delays in the sewage and water board work and the city Department of Public Works work. But they are working. I mean, they are working. We do have some projects ongoing. We just see a slowdown in what they were going to advertise and let to bid.
We had one project that got shut down for about a month. That was a large project, Convention Center Boulevard, and the Convention Center got shut down for a month, but it's back online again, working right now. And we have one other project at Tulane that the university shut down on their own. So,
and the project at the airport, tying in I-10 to the airport, was shut down for a few weeks, maybe a month, because of the virus. So I think it's back up and running. I'm not sure, but it's been shut down for a good 3 to 4 weeks.
Thank you, gentlemen. Next question comes from, I think it's KPLC out in Lake Charles, and wants to know, I guess last week, Lauren Scott blamed changes in ITEP for projects that went to Texas. And reporters wondering if you agree. Would also like to identify projects in the Lake Charles area that you think should be done. Obviously, I-10 bridge has been the community priority, but didn't know if you had a sort of a broader wish list.
We don't have I mean, look, we don't pick projects from an industry standpoint. That is done by the public and private owners. Certainly the I-10 bridge in Lake Charles has been on the table for discussion, and when and where and how much and for I can't remember when it wasn't discussed. And it's one of those projects like the Baton Rouge Bridge. I'll believe it when I see it. But I think the ITEP issue has caused some pause in the industrial sector to move some projects further to Texas. Quite frankly, I'm not going to weigh into the politicals of the ITEP. We don't represent petrochem contractors, AGC, nor residential, but we do have some contractors that work in the plants. But I think ITEP has definitely caused a pause in the industrial sector to let me look at where I can go someplace else and not have to jump through all these hoops to get my tax exempt status from the state of Louisiana or from local governments.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then M-Track asks, do we think that state and local parish construction projects that were delayed or postponed due to COVID will have the budgets to resume when our state begins to open up? Or is there a risk that these projects could be canceled altogether? I feel like we touched on this, but just want to make sure we're addressing that question directly.
100%. I mean, I don't think any city, parish, state, or even the federal government knows what their budgets are going to be, how this virus is going to affect their budget. And I think, and I'm not going to and I think, look, we're not going to put construction in an argument about education or healthcare or any other the vital services that government provides. But I think when everything does kind of start getting back to normal, if there is a new normal, I think definitely some of these projects will be on the chopping block because parishes and cities in the state will have to provide more financial assistance to some of these education and healthcare services that they need to do so. That's one of my concerns and look at the tax revenue from the trust fund. I'm with Brian. I think I filled up my vehicle one time in the last month and a half. And it's wonderful to travel on the interstate right now because no one's out there, but that's not healthy. $1 per gallon gas at the pump, ladies and gentlemen, is not good for us, for Louisiana or for anybody.
I agree with that. And just like you were talking about your fuel, I'm still driving in the Causeway every morning, and there's cars on it, but not nearly the amount of cars I'm used to seeing. Usually it's bumper to bumper traffic for 24 miles. Now you can have nobody in front of you for 2 miles, nobody back here for 2 miles. So the consumption of the fuel's way down, and it's a known fact that nobody's visiting New Orleans on tourism either. So New Orleans is going to take a serious hit. They've already taken, I'm sure, but I think it's going to show up in future infrastructure work with lack of tourism money coming in. It's a major hit to the city. So these things, I think today is just the tip of the iceberg. I think some of these things, when it starts settling in, is going to have its effect, just like the highway department. I think their works, from what Ken and I were talking earlier, is going to keep going right now, but I think after a while it'll be hit, and it's going to show up in the future jobs until something else changes to pick it up. So that's a scary part, very concerning to us.
Gotcha. And as we start to wrap up, I wanted to share some of the figures that Ken Simonson had prepared, overall construction employment figures in in Louisiana. And as we wrap up, there is, so I've got it on screen share. There's one slide for the state. Leave it there for a second, then I'll flip over to the Metro one in a bit. But we'll wrap up with, I guess Ryan's got one last question, and then we'll come up with sort of final observations from our three panelists. But the last question is, as many of the city's parishes are historically slow to pay, specifically New Orleans, and given tax revenues are down significantly, are there any concerns among contractors about getting paid for past work or being delayed longer or possibly never receiving payment?
Ken and I had that same exact discussion in his office before we walked in here. Sometimes even if New Orleans had plenty of money, I don't know if they could get the checks out the door. That's sad, but I think lack of money is going to definitely affect them for sure.
The word never is not, I don't think is going to work. I think people are going to get paid for what they do. Municipalities were slow to start off with before the virus. I've warned the industry. The new normal is not going to be the old normal. I mean, if things were slow before, they could be even slower again. Getting plan changes approved, getting paid, just working the paper, getting projects inspected, getting your permits. I think there's going to be a new normal out there, and it all may be just a longer wait period to get those processes worked out.
Gotcha. And as we wrap up, Ken Simonson, and kind of work our way through, are there any last final observations or points you want to make as we wrap up the virtual media event? Ken Simonson?
Well, the second chart that you had up just a minute ago shows how far and quickly some of the metro areas in the state have fallen from peak. Just as little as 2 years ago, we hit peak employment in Baton Rouge and also in Lake Charles. Lake Charles employment down 25% already. Unfortunately, I think that the downward slope on the employment for each of these cities is likely to continue. Shreveport was already at record level unemployment over the past 6 months, so perhaps they've already hit bottom, but I think we're likely to see further declines unless we get that funding for infrastructures and that support for state and local government. In that case, we're looking to both the Federal Reserve and Congress and the President to help out state and local government.
Yeah. Ken?
Yes.
Ken Naquin, go ahead.
You have something for me?
I just didn't know if you had any final observations or thoughts before we wrapped up.
No, and again, I think the fastest way for the economy to come back is investment in infrastructure, drainage, telecommunications, public buildings, highways, roads, and bridges. I think this country has not been up to par with the rest of the world on addressing our crumbling infrastructure. And I just think it's a way to get us to kickstart this economy and get the economy going is to invest in infrastructure. It's an investment that pays dividends when you do it.
Gotcha. And Jonathan, did you have any last? We'll give you the last word, Jonathan.
Well, thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. I fully agree with Ken. It goes back to what I said a little bit earlier. I think the stimulus packages are great, but I think from the government's perspective, it will be a lot wiser to give money, get something in return. They put money out there, they'll get the infrastructure as well as the tax revenue from building the economy back up and getting it rolling again. I think it helps the people putting the cash out there, but the cash isn't going to come back to the government and reduce any of that debt. But I think once they put some money out in infrastructure, it'll come back and they'll get something for their dollar. They'll get some bang for their buck that they put out there, opposed to just putting out the cash and having another couple of trillion in debt without anything to really show for it at this point. But if they put out $1 trillion infrastructure package, they'll actually get $1 trillion of infrastructure to show for it. And I think that's most important, my perspective.
All right. Well, thank you all for serving as our panelists in our virtual news event, and thank you to all the folks who logged in. On behalf of AGC of America, I just want to say that we hope that all of you stay healthy and safe, and all of you should, all the media on the virtual news event should have received in your inbox by now the news releases that we put out with the data. And if for any reason you didn't get it, or if you have follow-up questions, you can reach me. Again, it's Brian Termail, and you just email me at Brian, BRIAN TURMAIL @agc.org. We'd be happy to take care of you. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a good day, and we'll look forward to seeing you all the next time we do one of these in person.
All right, Ryan, thank you.